Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few, welcome to today's webinar, COVID-19, Preparing for What Comes Next, hosted by the International Economic Development Council. And on behalf of the International Economic Development Council, we want to welcome each of you. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You have joined using your computer's speaker systems by default on a muted line, and you will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the GoToWebinar control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a follow-up email within the next 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording. I would now like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Eloisa Klementich, President and CEO of Invest Atlanta and member of the IEDC Board of Directors. Welcome, Eloisa.
Thank you very much for having us. And I do want to also thank the IEDC for putting on this webinar. This will be a great time for us to explore some of the options that all of our communities have as we all are dealing with the COVID-19. I will run through just what to expect on this call. We're going to start with some quick introductions with our speakers. Each speaker will speak about 5 to 8 minutes. Then I have some questions that I'm going to pose to our panelists, and then we're going to open it up to you. So as indicated, if there are questions, we'd ask that you post them on the side of the questions on the chat so that we can make sure that we are addressing some of your questions. You know, if you had asked all of us about 2 weeks ago what we were thinking, what our objectives were, I bet you no one really had this idea in mind that we were going to be many of our states on lockdown here and where we are,
or to make sure that we are addressing some of your questions.
So,
you know, if you had asked all of us about 2 weeks ago what we were thinking, what our objectives were, I bet you no one really had this idea in mind that we were going to be many of our states on lockdown.
So apologize for that technical difficulty. We are learning. I also want to say that what we're doing now is we're really excited that we're able to work with each of you and each of our panelists to provide some ideas. Today's call, our objective for today's call are 4. The first is, what can we do now to assist our businesses in our communities? Is it a buy local program? Or is it loans? Is it tax and permit relief? So some of the speakers are gonna talk about their strategies to address the issue as we see it today. The second is, what happens when this passes? So we are also gonna think about when this passes, what are some of the continued programs and activities that we should look to be setting up in terms of our communities? What can we continue to do? And with some of those things, we thought about social distancing, the new world of COVID-19, and how does city regulation work with drive-throughs and shopping malls? So those are some of the questions that we will potentially also answer in this call. The third objective of today is how are we as economic development organizations preparing for this? Organizationally, has your staff, in terms of their duties and their focus, do we need to reorientate that focus and that look as to what they are doing? And so that would be the third objective. And the final objective of today's call is to ask the question, where is your city and your city's budget? I'm here in Atlanta. I'll tell you that my hotel motel tax is down. My alcohol and beer license is down. Many of the funds that we rely on in terms of taxes are down. But with that said, are we ready for the federal and the state and even the nonprofit and for-profit communities? They are putting up funds to help support with the recovery. We are the ideal organizations to apply and accept those funds. Why? Because we have the infrastructure, we have the compliance, and we're here for the long haul. So maybe us reorienting ourselves in terms of where are we looking to sources of capital to ensure that our communities and our businesses continue to thrive and be strong. So I'll highlight those again, because I think that's what we're trying to get our speakers. And if I think success is that you've gone away after this call with a good idea, a thought, a policy, or just an initiative to try to help your communities continue to survive under this new COVID-19. So first, how do we address businesses today? Two, what happens after this situation and what programs and initiatives do you continue to thrive and promote? The third is, how are you as an organization preparing to adjust, and are you having to move staff time and focus? And fourth is, are you ready to apply for some of the funds that are coming down and start looking at alternative sources of capital? So here in the city of Atlanta, we have already had over 66, well, we have, I should say, our population is about 479,000. COVID-19 cases in Fulton County is 111. We continue to focus on how we can stop the spread. And so again, social distancing, and we are all working from home. This has been a challenge for us, but we have been working very diligently to try to ensure that we're continuing to help some of our communities. So let me now jump into our speakers, and I want to thank each of them for their time and their focus and what we are all doing together. And the first person that I'd like to introduce and welcome is Bill Allen. Bill Allen is Chief Executive Officer of the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation for the County of Los Angeles. Bill has really been a leader in the state. He was very early on into COVID-19, beginning to address some of the impacts of a loss of tourism and visitors to the County of Los Angeles and the huge economic impact that this is having on his economy. He is at the forefront of economic development and policy perspectives and how we can address some of the concerns and impacts of COVID-19. So Bill, I know you also serve as board of directors, so IEDC, thank you, and I turn it off to you. Bill.
Thanks, Eloisa. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes,
Eloisa,
Bill,
can you hear me?
Fine, perfect.
Terrific. Well, thanks everybody for joining the call today. Jeff Finkel was telling us all that we have an extraordinary number of colleagues around the country and around the world participating today. So thank you for your interest and for stepping up as economic development professionals to deal with what I believe will be the greatest economic challenge of our lifetimes. Here in Los Angeles, this has hit us very, very hard. First of all, as of the day that the slides were prepared, it showed 230. I'm glad to see they've been updated as of today that we have 409 cases. We in Los Angeles are a very international economy. The minute we heard there was a problem in China, we realized that problem would soon be on our shores because China is our largest trading partner. China is our largest overseas source of tourism visitors. China is well represented in our universities, in our communities, and we realized if the virus was in Wuhan, it would soon be in Los Angeles. Our public health director gave us at the LAEDC a heads up a couple of weeks ago that the testing was going very slowly and that the likely reality of cases in Los Angeles County was going to be much higher than any of the numbers in the early days. So even when you hear 409 today, know that that is a significant underrepresentation of the true number of cases in our region. So when she gave us that information on Wednesday, March 11, the next day we converted the LAEDC to a fully remotely operating economic development organization. I should clarify for my peers around the world listening in on this webinar today that we're a private nonprofit created by our county about 40 years ago to engage the private sector, to engage the 88 cities of Los Angeles County and the nonprofit sector to help the county government grow a more vibrant and sustainable economy. Today, we're very focused on making that economy inclusive, and so much of our concern goes to those small businesses and micro enterprises, particularly from underrepresented communities, which are very thinly capitalized, and we believe at some of the greatest risk, really existential risk as a result of the impacts in our economy. Last week, after we had launched a number of online resources for businesses of all sizes, for workers in our region as well, our local officials, our city of Los Angeles and many other cities in the region, our county of Los Angeles, and our state of California all issued a series of stay-at-home orders. Those are all in effect now in Los Angeles, and they affect a very significant segment of our economy. The slide that's up in today's webinar are demographics and employment numbers for the city of Los Angeles. We serve the entire county, which is a population of 10.1 million people, with a civilian labor force of 5.16 million people. 4.9 of those million people were employed. We had a 4.3% unemployment rate before the impact of COVID-19 hit our region. And we're now seeing unprecedented levels of unemployment insurance claims. So we will be hit hard, and we began looking and posting on our website from our Institute for Applied Economics what sectors would be impacted. And again, the IEDC team were kind enough to indicate what are top employment sectors in our region, but this slide that's now up is what I want to draw your attention to. We have 1 million people who are employed between accommodation and food, retail trade, and arts and entertainment. It's about 450,000 in accommodation and food services. I think there's a typo in the charter that says 50,000. It's actually 450,000 in the county. 410,000 in retail trade, 98,000 in arts and entertainment. Most all of that has been shut down by the stay-at-home orders. And so we're working very closely with our federal, state, and local partners to ensure that programs are put in place to provide capital to our employers so that they can keep their doors open as long as possible. And if they absolutely cannot and have to lay people off, that we have appropriate resources from the federal, state, and local governments to support the workforces of these different industry sectors through these periods of closure. We have 1.8 million people in LA County who are employed by businesses with less than 50 employees. And as you all well know, those businesses are disproportionately less well capitalized than larger employers, certainly have less access to public markets, certainly have less access to many sources of debt capital. So our state has allocated $1 billion of resources, not only for the public health response, but also for economic response. Our city of Los Angeles has quickly stood up an $11 million fund for micro enterprises and smaller businesses in marginalized communities. Our philanthropic community has been in conversation with us at the LADC in the last few days about standing up a variety of different efforts, including they've come to us about coordinating community-based organizations that reach deep into South LA, East LA, Southeast LA counties, historically lower income communities of color, where the impact is going to be significant and where not only are businesses thinly capitalized, but families have literally only days worth of income to survive and literally live paycheck to paycheck. And so we're trying to work with our community-based organizations to get deep into those communities and inform them about the services, programs, capital sources that exist that are coming in every day, new ones from our federal government, from our state government, from our county government, from the 88 cities in our region, from nonprofits, from financial institutions, from CDFIs, from our philanthropic community. We're blessed with a lot of those different resources in our region, but we're also cursed by the complexity of that. There are thousands of organizations trying to help across a 4,000 square mile county with, as I said, 88 organized cities, incorporated cities, and more than 100 unincorporated communities. And trying to coordinate that response is enormously challenging. So we've set up a coronavirus response page at the LAEDC website. It's at laedc.org/coronavirus. And it's listing these resources that are targeted for small business assistance or targeted for worker relief. And then we're working with other longtime partners and new partners throughout the region to get the word out. We have historically operated for at least the last 25 years a business assistance program that has been fortunate to win wonderful recognition through IEDC awards programs over the years, particularly for something they set up after the Great Recession, called a layoff aversion program, which has helped save thousands, I believe actually tens of thousands of jobs for people in LA County by working with our most at-risk businesses that we identify through a careful screening process of Dun & Bradstreet data and outreach to those businesses and intervene before they are likely to lay people off. Many of those companies have already been calling our business assistance team saying, hey, you've helped us before over the last 10 years. We need you now more than ever. And frankly, we're being overwhelmed by the number of requests for assistance. So we're all going to have to work together in our regions. We're all going to have to work across regions in these kinds of conversations to enlighten each other onto what practices are working, what are the obstacles we're all facing, what are the efficiencies that we're finding. And so I welcome the opportunity to engage further in this dialogue with you all. I'll stop now so that others can make their introductory remarks and then look forward to the Q&A session.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Bill. And bring up a lot of great points. I have some questions and I'm seeing the questions come in. So again, as Bill said, we're going to go through all of our speakers and then we'll come back and ask some questions and highlight, because you mentioned some really good programs, Bill, we'll drill down on. The next of our speakers is Mike Williams. Mike Williams is a general manager of economic development, culture, and tourism for the city of Toronto. Mike is going to be addressing how Toronto is dealing with COVID-19, and he's going to reflect on his experience with SARS in 2003. We also think that Mike will be able to share how he's been able to deal with the cross-border issues with the US and Canada. Mike, I know we met many of you. We met you and your team at the annual conference, so 3 years ago, and welcome to the webinar and love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. Mike? Okay, we're checking his microphone. Mike, I'm thinking you may be muted. If you don't mind, please.
You warned me about that. I was warned about 3 times about making sure I took the mute button off, and so I apologize to everybody.
No worries, Mike.
So it was okay, thank you. Thank you, Eloisa, for everything. It's a very different world today than it was 3 years ago when IEDC was in Toronto. It's a very different world now for me from the beginning of this call, because the province of Ontario, which we sit in, and the city have declared states of emergencies 5 minutes ago. We have we were, and I'll come back to SARS in a second, but we were one of the first places to have diagnosed cases of COVID-19. And for a long time, we seem to be containing it. And I'm hoping that we are going to do okay on that. Our caseload is up in around 250 right now, and we've had 1 death, unfortunately. But we're faring much, much better, luckily, and touch wood as I tap my head, than many other places in the world, which I feel very, very much for, including our colleagues in Europe especially. Many of the same things that Bill has mentioned are true here in Toronto. We don't have quite as much complexity, but in Canada, we run basically a weak mayor system, which means that there's less devolved power to the local mayor. We have a great mayor, but he doesn't have as much power, and we rely very heavily on the province and especially the federal government at this point in time. 2 weeks ago, today I landed in the UK on a tourism business mission, believe it or not. It seems ridiculous when I think about it now, because we thought that things were moving along okay and we could go ahead with that trip. That's not the case now. In 2 days, our whole hospital.
Hey, Mike, this is Eloisa. Can I get you just, your audio seems to be cutting in and out. Just want to make sure we get you. Mike, maybe I wonder if your internet's slow. Why don't I do this? Mike, if you don't mind, I'm going to
The industry, and it was only a weekend ago, shut down our film and television production industry, which we are. So a lot of the challenges we've been faced with that are very close to the line, which includes many of our diverse and ethnic groups. We are a very ethnic city. Over half our population was not born in Canada. The slide there shows the data for the region. The city is about half those numbers. So we have worked hard at trying to meet some of the worst challenges. And I'll go through some of those now. First of all, how we're organized. We have a number of tables, as I'm sure every municipality has, or every region, to try to coordinate. We have a Team Toronto, which includes all of our investment and attraction agencies, as well as our Chamber of Commerce, and a series of business associations that appeal to particular ethnic business groups, trying to work hard at coordinating feedback to government about what's important. Key point, which I'm sure many are facing right now, which is what is an essential business? Do you shut down food manufacturing, which for us is critically important from an employment perspective, but also from perspective of food for the 9 or 10 million people that live in this region. And that filters out into packaging companies. We have a sugar plant in the middle of our downtown. So we have to make those decisions in the next few hours to make sure that key supply chains continue that are important. We have a number of pharmaceutical manufacturers here. It's very key for them as well. We sort of split our approach within the city to working with community and social agencies, and to Bill's point about coordinating the zillion of those, working closely with our United Way to ensure good coordination. We already had a good base, and we've geared up on that. We have a significant population that lives in shelters, and it's still winter here, or almost finished winter here, so that's important, and we're working on that. We have done a number of programs. We have similar to Bill, we have a website up. If you just go to www.toronto.ca/COVID-19, you'll see what's scrolling out. That was basically at zero about 3-4 days ago. Working heavily in the interface between landlords and tenants. Many big landlords understand the situation, but many other small landlords, the property is their only source of income. They're very reluctant to give up the rent. Almost no small business is going to be in shape to pay their rent on April 1st, or if they can get through April 1st, on May 1st. So there's focus on trying to help that situation. Local municipality is currently deferring property taxes and any other fees that people should pay to the city. We're working on the federal government to do the same and then provincial government. We have a harmonized retail sales tax, which it's called a harmonized sales tax, which is shared by the province and the federal government, trying to get them to forego that just to keep some cash in everybody's pocket. Otherwise, I don't think they're going to pay anyway. We working hard on, and I'd like to talk about a little bit about recovery. While it seems a long way away, we learned a number of things on SARS. First thing we learned about SARS was the importance at the front end of identifying cases. We did not in SARS, which is why Toronto was one of the worst hit cities in the world outside of China, and a little bit in Hong Kong and Taiwan and California, but ours was by far the worst hit because it got into our health system. The first case 0 went into a hospital and spent 7 hours infecting everybody before he was isolated. So we learned our lesson on that, and so I think we've done a great job there. The other lesson that we learned was on how to do recovery. We had a great public-private partnership that did recovery. Unfortunately, I think the way SARS ended, which was quite quick, and so we had a strong burst of well-funded activities to bring the hospitality industry back, is not going to work this time for us, because I believe this will be a more gradual process coming out of it, that lockdowns will loosen a little bit, some more companies will get back involved. So it's going to be a much more complex process, and recovery efforts should be based, in my view, on what to do to get industry going again and get main industries going before we do the hospitality industry, because we need to get money into pockets. We need confidence to come back. We're in the process of commissioning some work about this idea of what will be the psychological impact of social distancing for a period of time. Will people be extremely reluctant to go into movie theaters and to go into concert venues and sports venues, or will they soon forget? And we need some pretty smart research on that, because that will define what we do in terms of recovery program. The other aspect about planning for recovery, the mayor has been running a series of roundtables with different groups, with different sectors, economic sectors, university and college presidents, faith leaders, a very broad range of roundtables. And I would say that every single roundtable has said it's important to begin planning for recovery now, even though we're so heavily involved with trying to cope with the fast-moving nature of both the disease and the responses to it, to give people a sense of hope and expectation that there will be an end to this and that we will come out of it. I agree with Bill that unless you're over 90 years old, you won't remember anything about the last time we faced this kind of massive shutdown, which was the Second World War in Europe. We didn't face that in North America. So this is completely uncharted territory. No government has enough money to keep all businesses whole right now and to keep all staff whole right now. So depending upon how long this takes, this could get very, very difficult for everybody, which is why, in my last comment, or second last comment, is it is really important to get this disease under control and to encourage the young that they may be relatively immune. They're not completely immune, but they are carriers and they have to stop socializing. And then my final comments are that I think the organizations and places that do the best job and heads up, looking down the road and heads down, getting it done today, are going to be the ones that are going to be most successful. And that, to echo Bill's comments, it's really important for us all to work together. Thanks for the opportunity to share some of the experiences in Toronto, and I
Thank you,
look forward
Mike.
to the discussions and questions.
Thank you, Mike. We really appreciate your comments. I think I just want to highlight the importance of us being able to work together and leverage all other resources are there, from federal, state, nonprofit, and for-profit businesses. So I couldn't agree with you more. And we're going to drill down into that in just a second. Our third speaker for today is Jeff Sjostrom. Jeff is from a smaller town, Galveston, in the Gulf of Mexico. And Jeff, I know you have a lot of experience having to deal with hurricanes and hurricane season. He is the president and CEO of the Galveston Economic Development Partnership. We really invited Jeff for two reasons. First, it's because he has a specific focus on a smaller community, but he deals with a lot of same very difficult challenges in terms of resources that are available, and also just getting his entire community to respond to some of these devastations that are caused by hurricanes. In specific, Jeff is going to talk about one specific program that he has been able to work very diligently on, and that's a loan fund. So Jeff, I look forward to hearing about your loan fund and then your other experience that you could bring in to help others on the phone understand how you in your community are able to handle these economic shocks that occur to to the economy. Jeff?
Louisa, thank you and welcome to everybody. I appreciate the IEDC including us. And I think that the reason I'm on this call is because, like Mr. Finkel, I am a former Buckeye from Ohio. But I look forward to the conversation today. I'm going to cover just a few points. Galveston, we're a small coastal community of about 53,000 people. We're on the Gulf Coast of Texas. We've got 2 flagship universities with both the University of Texas Medical Branch and Texas A&M University at Galveston. We have a national lab that's dedicated to biodefense and bioterrorism. We have over 7 million tourists that come to Galveston on an annual basis, and we're the center of cruise activity for the state of Texas. Currently, we have over 1 million passengers that come through the turnstiles of Galveston, the port of Galveston, on an annual basis. And up until 2 weeks ago, we were in the planning stages of a new cruise terminal, about $100 million investment through Royal Caribbean that, when completed, will double our cruise capacity. We have 3 key sectors in Galveston: maritime, tourism, and education and healthcare. And each of those sectors really equitably across the board represent our employment base and our economic impact base. With regard to COVID-19, for Galveston County today, we got 5 more cases identified earlier today, so we're up to 17 cases. Like most of you, we are under the same types of, we do not have shelter in place in Texas at this time, but everything is to-go orders. Our beach amenities have been closed, our schools are out, and essentially our entire community is being impacted by this pandemic. Currently, it really is kind of our motto down here is adapt and conquer. We're in a day-to-day management mode. We are blessed with Galveston being located on the Gulf Coast. We have a history of innovation and entrepreneurship when it comes to natural disasters. We have an incredibly robust emergency operations center, both team and process. The city has assumed their role in emergency management operations, and we're having weekly calls now with all of our key and primary stakeholders for both coordination and updates as they develop, in some cases by the hour. Moving forward in the response to COVID, what we have done, I think, from 2 fronts, one locally and then from a regional perspective. Locally, as I stated, we're having the weekly conference calls with our key stakeholders throughout the community. We did reactivate our business recovery loan program. I'll talk more about that in terms of the details a little bit later. But we also have embarked on a multi-tiered business recovery toolbox, if you will, of programs and resources for our business community. Industry specifically, we've got dialogues occurring on a daily basis that roam from tourism to the maritime to our educational sector. And fortunately, we're able to unify this through the city and through their EOC operations, and it's really helping in terms of just people talking together and staying somewhat unified. We are continuing to monitor and explore our local options that may be possible as a result of any state or federal program initiations that occur. And like the rest of you, at least in the U.S., looking to see what programs may come out of D.C. And then finally, we are also very actively looking to many of you and looking for best practices and models that are being developed in other areas. I think more time than ever before, we're all in this together, and we see a lot of creativity out in the marketplace, and we're looking to you. Regionally, we have an incredibly strong regional alliance of economic developers. It is organized through the Greater Houston Partnership and supported heavily through Centerpoint Energy. We had a conference call late last week, and we've initiated a number of steps, and the Greater Houston Partnership has stepped up and taken an incredible leadership role. We are planning out over the next number of weeks, weekly regional conference calls. We've got over 50 different economic development organizations, over 140 professionals that are participating in those calls. The Greater Houston Partnership will be collecting and inventorying best practices and looking at the types of tools, resources, and activities that can benefit all of us. The Greater Houston Partnerships created a COVID-19 web page as a centralized portal that, instead of each of us having to reinvent the wheel on a daily basis and basically spinning our wheels, putting all of this information together, we are evolving into that centralized hub through the Greater Houston Partnership that each of us locally can then just key into. And then finally, we're also compiling a regional listing of our economic developer, kind of the primary contacts, so that as people are looking for resources and connectivity, we'll have that at the regional level. Finally, moving into kind of the response from previous disasters, I had the benefit of meeting Jeff Finkel really the first time after Hurricane Katrina that struck back in 2005. We had Katrina and then Rita followed closely behind. 2008, we got taken to our knees with Hurricane Ike. In 2010, we had the Horizon oil spill. And then here most recently, 2017, Hurricane Harvey. With the passing of Hurricane Katrina, we formed a business recovery task force at the request of our mayor and formed an initiative that looked at both city improvements and lessons learned from our allies along the mid-coast, and then also looked specifically at the business community. Developed a number of tools and resources that we use even into today. With regard to tangible resources, really between 2008 and 2012, the GEDP was able to marshal a little over $100 million in business recovery resource tools and resource dollars, specifically back into our business community. The most successful program, the most direct and most responsive, was through a coalition of our community lenders. They came together in an unprecedented way after Hurricane Ike, literally by candlelight. We got them in a room together, talked about the need that our business community had. They looked at each other, said that they had money to lend. They came together and created a single pay note, short-term, low interest rate program that they all have offered across the board. So our banks are not competing with each other. It's local lenders helping local businesses. Between September and December of 2008, our local bank consortium reinvested over $40 million into the Galveston business community. And this was critical for the gap financing period where our businesses were impacted, were attempting to recover, and were waiting for insurance, SBA, and other programs to develop. Excuse me. In addition to that program, we also created a number of other initiatives that ranged from a business recovery loan program that involved contributions from our corporate and philanthropic partners. We were able to secure out of $267 million that came to the city as a result of Hurricane Ike through CDBG. We took $2.5 million and created a forgivable loan program and issued that out to over 60 businesses that to this day, a number of those businesses are in business today because of our ability to get those needed resources into their hands. We were able to, one of the partners that doesn't get much talk that I hope we'll start hearing talk about is the Economic Development Administration. We're pleased and excited about SBA, and we're looking forward to seeing the SBA loan products and the processing and hoping that is going to deliver very needed resources. The Economic Development Administration has the ability to do things for communities and for economic development that no other agency does. We were able to secure 2 disaster recovery grants from EDA to assist our port and our medical branch and emerging technology sectors, both in the tune of $10 million. And then in partnership with the Houston Galveston Area Council, which is our regional planning council, they secured an additional $10 million for the creation of a revolving loan fund. And as we go forward, our hope is that those programs or those types of program dollars may be made available as part of the longer term recovery strategy. There are a number of other things that we did, and I think as we get into the questions, I'll be happy to go into more details. And as most, we have a series of lessons learned that we're willing to share with anyone with regard to some of the tools, trials, and tribulations. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate that. And I do see some questions coming in, so I'll come back to you, Jeff, on some of those questions. But let's move to our last speaker. Our last speaker is Mike Briella. Mike has his own firm. He has plenty of experience with working with big companies such as Amazon, but now he really focuses on his consulting on helping the future missions of different clients throughout the nation and how really to leverage plans and policies that really could help businesses and communities thrive. And so, Mike, I'll turn it to you to talk to us a little bit about your experience and what you've been able to see and how communities can prepare.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Eloisa. It's great to be on board and to see solidarity with 1,500 folks dialed in right now listening to this webinar. We are going to come out of this stronger together. So my motto over the last few weeks is, I do not sleep so that the rest of you can, and have been working tirelessly and building out my team and reaching out to gather as much information from hundreds of different sources, speaking with hundreds of EDO leaders, public sector, private sector leaders, cabinet secretaries, governor's offices. And so the slides that I've put together today is a combination and summary of all of those conversations that have taken place, along with my insights, a significant amount of them coming to me or being communicated to you via 7 years as Amazon's Director of Economic Development, where I dealt with supply chain and resiliency and business continuity, site selection, public-private partnerships, etc. So the first slide that you're looking at is the reassess portion of what I call sort of a three-phase approach to COVID-19 for economic developers, and that's reassess, respond, and reinvent. So reassess is a synonym for data analytics, inventorying what do you have today, what do you need, what are the gaps, what is the data telling you. And so what you'll see over the 3 slides is that I've broken this down into 5 different informational or stakeholder verticals: health, business, policy, supply chain, workers. And so under each of these are bullet points with the types of data points and KPIs that are available out there in the marketplace. A lot of them are open source KPIs that could be scraped publicly from Bureau of Labor Analysis, Census Bureau, Federal Reserve Bank, etc. You've also got providers like Statebook and MZ and others that are compiling this data, and I believe can be tremendously helpful, as this data can be many times broken down at the granular level, understanding what's happening not just in your city, but within zip codes and communities and even census tracts and block numbers. And one of the greatest innovations that's come out in the data analytics space is the ability to track data based upon mobile phone user location and having that data anonymized and aggregated. And so you'll see on the next slide an example of this, and this is providing some real helpful insight to communities that are adopting these analytics tools. So this is a one tool called Viral Insight that's used by or created by Navigator and Statebook, and they look at risk factors, underlying pre-existing conditions and illnesses, the breakdown of the population, the breakdown of the types of healthcare specialists. You've got KPIs like number of hospital beds available, number of healthcare institutions with different capabilities like emergency trauma ward or having special infectious disease centers. You've got in the upper right-hand corner HPSA, which is a designation, a heat map of areas and states that have shortages of physicians. Why that's important is areas that have shortage of physicians that's designated by the government can be eligible for special grants and loans. What you'll see on the bottom of your screen is a heat map looking at where mobile phone users were last year and this year in a downtown area. So you'll see that the foot traffic year over year for the exact day is exponentially lower. And that type of data is available right now today, looking at week over week, day over day, et cetera, for dozens of different KPIs. And so if you could go back to the last slide for just a quick moment. So being able to assess how vulnerable is your business, is your community based upon number of jobs, number of retail establishments by industry and industry code, understanding the number of manufacturing, warehouse, distribution facilities by category and proximity to population density. These are KPIs that today can help inform strategy, contingency planning, emergency response, etc. Understanding unemployment claims, bankruptcy filings, foreclosures. As these get filed and these statistics are updated real time, it will give continued visibility to policymakers and to our EDO friends who are on the front lines right now of how do we handle this, what are the problems. We've got a limited amount of resources, but we are blessed to have a near unlimited amount of data that can help us prioritize resource allocation and distribution. So I will, let's fast forward to the third slide. Great. So incredibly important is understanding that in the current environment, we have redefined this, the concept of who is a hero. I recall being in New York City on 9/11, so many unsung heroes and first responders. And fast forwarding to today, 19 years later, there's a new generation of folks. They don't necessarily have badges or put out fires, but they are working 20 hours a day that are driving without a break to deliver food to warehouses and food kitchens and pantries and small business restaurant owners, et cetera, folks that are manufacturing and distributing critical medical supplies, et cetera. These are the folks that we need to make sure have the resources and the recognition and the compensation to keep us going through this very, very unprecedented challenge. So looking at health response, being able to mobilize resources, understanding the number of retired nurses and doctors in a certain proximity, the ability to get in touch with them, the ability to look at the COVID-19 diagnosis data that's coming out and refreshed on a daily basis, and then using being able to filter that data to extrapolate impact and responses, know when you're going to run out of hospital beds or medication or supplies, and then working in tandem with your private sector leaders as well as elected officials to reach out to supply chain executives and get up-to-date information and ensure that equity in the supply chain, and if there's disruptions, how do we respond to that? How do we mitigate that? What I've found as another hero on the business front, which is a new generation of entrepreneurs. There's a company in upstate New York that manufactures air domes that can be a 25,000 square foot air dome that can be used as a treatment or triage facility with extra beds, can be constructed for about $500,000 in 4 weeks and be able to accommodate hundreds of additional new staff and patients, et cetera. The folks that are coming up and establishing mobile delivery services, both for profit and not for profit, have a neighbor who is delivering food for free at no upcharge to community members who have an elderly relative. And so the nonprofit sector and NGOs have been just as entrepreneurial as the private sector. Creating an economic emergency command center and war room, extremely important. Who are the single points of contact that people can rely upon as Jeff mentioned before, to be able to call somebody and for them to know what are the federal programs through CDBG, EDO, state and local economic development agencies, how liquidity requirements may be loosened to promote easier and faster lending to small businesses. Having that single-threaded contact and knowing how to disseminate that information is priceless in keeping retail establishments and critical businesses afloat. From a policy standpoint, having an open feedback loop with policymakers and constituents, listening to their complaints, listening to their frustrations, and doing your best to operationalize and translate that into intelligence, actionable intelligence, and real policies, and continue that circular loop. Use social media, real-time sharing of information. I will continue to preach as long as I breathe the usefulness of open data and sharing data among public and private sector businesses and individuals, and them being able to access data that will tell them what can I expect in coming days and weeks, et cetera, in terms of what the needs are and supplies.
Yes.
Eloisa, did you have a question?
No, I was just agreeing, Mike. If you
Okay.
can wrap it up, that'd be great, Mike, so we can get to questions.
That's fine. Yep, absolutely. And then I'll end in 60 seconds on reInvent. I think from the policy perspective, it's extremely important that EDOs from a policy perspective get it right. Just like we're looking at this aid package that's in DC, we want to get it right the first time. We want to use data-driven policy making. We want to see incentive policies to promote a circular economy, local hiring, construction, and procurement. But when you don't have that labor that you can access, that you are able to ease those requirements and be flexible. We have to change the conversation about subsidies and incentives. Incentives are going to be extremely important in the short term to prop up small and medium and even some large businesses, but we can't get back into the cycle of permanent subsidies and offsets. We need to create communities with healthy tax bases so that critical services like delivering healthcare, being able to access funds and critical services are going to be paramount to a full recovery, and to make sure when we do provide subsidies or incentives that they're for high wage jobs that are resilient, industries that are going to be around years from now, and we're going to have to just retool the entire incentive toolkit, because a lot of the jobs coming back are going to be remote worker jobs or part-time jobs that might not fit into the traditional categories of the type of jobs you'd want to induce, but are going to be the critical backbone to an economic recovery.
Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate that. You know, we're seeing a lot of the questions, so I'm going to start going through some of the questions, and we're going to try to get to all of them. Well, I should say, IEDC, thank you very much to the IEDC team. We'll be getting to all your questions. I'm going to highlight some of them that I see consistent. And I want to thank Steve in particular for this one. You know, he asked the question about how do you balance as an EDO the need to help support your current businesses, and then also do you preserve some of the funding that you are able to get to help with reinstating or restarting your economy. And Bill, I was hoping that I could ask you this question in particular, because you mentioned that there is an $11 million allocation for micro enterprises in Los Angeles. Can you expand a little bit on, one, what will those funds go to, and how did you guys make that decision as to the best way to allocate those resources?
So that's a City of Los Angeles program, and Mayor Garcetti recognized that there were requirements under SBA loan programs or other state loan programs that might be difficult for some of our smallest and most vulnerable businesses to qualify for, or standards to meet. And so he established this fund with some city resources and is looking to augment it with local philanthropic resources to try and get capital to our smallest and most vulnerable enterprises. The notion is that we have in Los Angeles a significant number of immigrant communities, including significant numbers of undocumented immigrants who are not going to be able to receive certain federal benefits. And yet we need those people to be able to survive this economic shock. And so he's trying to create the most flexible, most inclusive programs that he can, and other cities in the county are doing the same. And at the same time, I should mention, they're also trying to work in local government to relieve pressures on businesses, to reduce costs, because it's going to be difficult to get enough capital to enough enterprises to minimize the impacts across such a highly populous region. So the city, the county, the state have initiated a number of orders that are prohibiting utility shutoffs for homeowners or small businesses, evictions for apartment dwellers, or evictions for small business tenants, foreclosures for mortgages. There's a number of efforts being made to try and protect small businesses and individuals while we try and get the capital that will be flowing from these federal programs that are still being debated in Congress even today to the communities in need.
Here in Atlanta as well. So that's great that LA is doing that. Can we go, Jeff? I'm going to reach out to you. How does, we're seeing a lot about loans. Can you kind of help us understand some of those on the callers? When we talk to businesses, they're saying, Eloisa, we don't need debt, we need grants. How do you balance the need between a debt tool and a grant tool, and the fact that you have limited resources? And then did you really then, a post question of that would be, is how successful was it to keep these businesses actually open? So Jeff?
You bet. I think there's a couple of things, and one that's kind of academic, but that we've hit on ever since Hurricane Ike, is we got to get our small businesses planning more on the front end to mitigate financial loss and hardship on the back end. And that's a tough thing to do, but as a profession, we're going to need to do more of that in the future. I think in terms of the businesses, as an example, 80% of our small businesses are sole proprietorships. They're not geared up for loans. They're not very sophisticated in terms of record keeping and data, and they are hesitant to get into government loan programs. What we look at is there's kind of 4 tiers of loan programs or products that are out there. One's the CDBG, targeting businesses that can qualify under low to moderate income standards and national objectives. One is the SBA. The difference this time out with the economic injury loans that are being processed as we speak today is that there's no consideration of businesses that have credit elsewhere. And so we've identified that as a potential challenge for us. But for a good number of businesses, they'll be able to access those. Bank loans are for some of really the businesses that are already committed to our region and folks that people have relationships with. And then micro loans through a number of different providers. The real challenge is how the federal government, it's going to be interesting to see how they turn these loan programs into forgivable loans, effectively grant type situations. Right. And I think because of the extreme nature of this event, that's going to be a critical piece that's going to be necessary if we're going to keep our business community, and specifically the small business community, viable.
Yeah, so this is, thank you, Jeff. This is Eloisa in Atlanta. What we're doing, because I see some of the questions, is a 0% interest rate, 6 to 12 month deferment, anywhere from $5,000 to $30,000 loan. To Jeff's point, currently it's set up as a loan here in Atlanta, and if anybody would like those guidelines, I'm happy to share those. But there is discussions about making a grant or a deferred loan if they're able to maintain the same or 90% of the employees in 6 months. So whether that actually happens or not, I am not sure, but there is discussions on that loan portfolio. So definitely a tool, but the challenge will be is how do you balance debt and taking on more debt? Obviously, the company's number one request is grants. Let's go quickly now to Mike in Toronto. Tourism plays a big role, and I know I'll come back to you, Bill, as well. But Mike, tourism, big role for you in Toronto. How do you see the recovery post COVID-19 in terms of social distancing in restaurants. Have you had any general thoughts about how your communities are going to need to adapt to the COVID-19?
Yeah, it's a tough question, and I alluded a little bit to trying to understand the psychology of people when this is all over. I think it's pretty clear that rather than having, like we did, the Rolling Stones about a month after the SARS epidemic had been declared over out at a airport strip with 600,000 people, this is going to be at the exact opposite end of the spectrum. I think we're going to have to work small and local, get people comfortable and going into restaurants and doing sort of outdoor small music concerts, very local. So I think our effort to rebound our tourism industry will stay on the staycation part of things to begin with, which is just get communities going. We all have many, many different local arts and local cultural groups, work with them to do small events and to get everybody a little bit comfortable and get them away from their Zoom or the quarantine ideas of sitting in front of a video having a drink with your best friend across town, and start doing it with your best friend across the table in a restaurant. And then I think we'll gradually ease into bigger events, again, still focused on the home. I think hotels will get more business from locals to begin with than from visitors. And as we just feel that way along, start to ramp up some of the other things, because I do think it's going to take everybody a little bit of time to find their feet and understand that they can safely gather. But I can't imagine people jumping on a plane tomorrow to fly to Paris the day after the last case was diagnosed. That's the other thing, is that this happened to us in SARS and is modeled by many people, is that most jurisdictions stop their prevention measures too soon, and there's a bounce back of the disease. And it probably can be expected this time with this as well. So again, another reason for not over-investing in the early stages of the recovery, but doing stuff locally and then ramping up as things become more secure.
Yes, definitely. We're not in a sprint. This is definitely a marathon. I agree with you there.
Eloisa, if I can add, it's Bill in LA. Until we have successful, proven antiviral medications and a vaccine, I think Mike's exactly right. Our economy here just celebrated, getting to the 50 million visitors a year to Los Angeles. But so many of those are coming from internationally. And of course, by definition, they're visiting us from other places. So the likelihood of people coming from around the world to visit Los Angeles or any of our cities on this call, until there's a clear antiviral medication or vaccine, I think is small. But I do think that because people are social animals by nature, once we feel that we are safe medically to travel again, there's going to be a pent-up demand to travel that will, I think, be significant and be very refreshing to all of our regional economies.
So I want to ask this one to Mike, and then I'm going to ask a group question on rural economies. But first, Mike Briella, in your opinion, there are many programs and initiatives that already exist, right? That maybe not the EDO is doing, but many others are doing. Do you think it's better to team up with those other organizations, or is it better to create your own, for example, loan program? How do you, balance the need to leverage, and how do you balance just doing it sometimes on your own? What kind of recommendations could you give our communities?
I would say, the economic development first responders, the local regional EDOs are going to know best what their local businesses and employees need and institutions need. So I would say customizing a program at the local level to address those needs, again, using data analytics and measuring on a regular basis what those needs are is extremely important. What you can do is you can look at this in the same way when you've got a typical economic development project. They might leverage opportunity zones, new markets tax credit, state grants for job creation, infrastructure funds, utility-based programs, partnering with the local WIB and workforce board, et cetera. So I would say expand the capital stack, have the EDO curate hyper-local programs, but in a lot of cases that EDO, like applying for feds funding, you can go to the feds and apply for a block grant, and then as long as it's within a permitted use, convert those funds into a use that's appropriate and tailored to what your local needs are. So I would say I always lean on the locals taking the lead, staying in close contact with your regional, state, federal partners, and then being able to be the Sherpa and liaison that's able to translate for businesses that are in need of capital or other assistance. What does that financing stack look like in terms of grants, loans, forgivable loans, and other in-kind assistance, and then walk them through what's the best way to access and optimize what their funding needs are.
Yeah. And this one, I'm going to open it up. So I'm going to ask just the panelists if you could chime in on this one. You know, you mentioned tapping into other resources. Some of our rural communities or just smaller communities lack the resources to be able to create some sort of program or new programming. For example, the revolving loan fund that I referenced, I was able to tap into 1.5 million out of general fund dollars to get that. If that is not available, does anyone on the panel have any thoughts about where the regional or smaller communities could go to try to tap into some of these alternative resources that are available? So maybe what I'll do is I'll start with Jeff from Galveston. Do you mind telling us, Jeff, where have you looked to when you're looking for resources?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's a big challenge. The $64,000 question for all of these types of programs is where's the source of capital coming from? And for our rural and smaller communities, you start local to see what can be made available, but in all likelihood, it becomes more of a regional leveraging and looking to see either through planning councils like we've done successfully in this region with the Houston Galveston Area Council, where we're able to take that centralized planning function and as a part of the disbursement of funds that come from the feds down to the locals, they really play quarterback, or at least historically have played the quarterback role in terms of methods of distributions and funding availability. It is not an easy thing to do, and that's what we learned leading up to Hurricane Ike, and I hate to say it, but it takes some planning and forethought before the event. At this juncture, I think a lot of what Mike said, there are a number of tools and resources that are out there. So any way that those can be blended into a program offering to the small business community or the rural business communities, I think there are some opportunities, and there are some tools that have been used in certain parts of the country that haven't really been utilized in others. And so I think the new markets and the opportunity zones and all of those kind of come into play.
Yeah. Bill, Mike, Williams, any thoughts?
I would just add that in our state of California, we've recognized in recent years that there's a significant disparity between the economic well-being of people who live on the coast and people who live in inland California. Historically, people have talked about a divide between Northern and Southern California, but the real disparities exist between coastal and inland California. And so through an organization some of us helped set up many years ago called the California Economic Summit, we developed an initiative called Regions Rise Together that really encouraged our state to be investing more significantly, more intentionally, more proactively in inland California, many of which are rural communities. So I think that there can be a focus at your state that many of us in larger, more populous, more urban regions should encourage to ensure that there are sufficient resources available to our inland or rural communities.
Yeah.
It's Mike Williams in Toronto. Just wanted to add to that the rural urban challenges exist obviously in Ontario, especially in the far north with many of our Indigenous reserves. But we also have challenges right in our main city where the health of the city is being phenomenally strong in the downtown, and some of our inner suburbs have begun to suffer significantly. And so we've reoriented a lot of our programs to focus on those areas on the assumption that the downtown could take care of itself. And we're also working with a lot of other community organizations on community economic development initiatives. And that's probably what I would suggest is that people focus very locally with local expertise that can direct on those small, very block by block kind of initiatives.
Yeah, again, here in Atlanta, one of the things if I would recommend if your teams have capacity is maybe get one employee to actually start looking at the funds that are available. I know JP Morgan has opened a fund, Amazon has opened up a fund to help these big organizations. It's going to require some time for individuals to apply, but this may be an alternative source that typically I as an EDO had never applied to before, and we're now putting a team together to apply for some of these funds. So that may be another option that people may want to consider. With that said, Mike Williams, I'm going to ask you, when you talked about what you were doing in Toronto, you mentioned working with the United Way. Can you just expand on that a little bit about how you worked with the United Way and what kind of resources were you able to tap into?
Sure. So the United Way here in Toronto is, I think, the second largest in North America, or might even be the largest. So we've had a long history of working with them. They have many people in the community. So we've divided the city into 11 zones. We've divided the services the city delivers in this kind of emergency into the same 11 zones. And we've put in paired teams to manage both the volunteer community and the city staff services that are delivered to disadvantaged people and a lot of the challenged groups that we serve. So we've set up a number of captains' tables to make sure that those coordination goes, and more importantly, those groups are charged with identifying every single community resource that exists in those 11 geographies and make sure that they can be instantly available on a caseload by case person by case per family basis, so that there's a very short period of time between an identification of a need and the identification of somebody that can help.
Yeah. So when we think about yes, go ahead. Sorry.
This is Jeff again. I just wanted to add one more thing. For the smaller communities, I would encourage them also to look to the Restore Your Economy website of IEDC. And within the communities, if you are able to find a couple of pilot programs that have been enacted in other places and are able to bring those to your business leaders of your community, it might help to give them some examples of what's been done to stir some new ideas on how communities could respond at this time based on what so many of us have done addressing this from our own perspectives.
Thank you, Jeff. You know, one of the things I heard several of you speak about was this, you set up a business task force. I think it was Bill and Jeff and Mike all spoke about it. Can one of you highlight the success, or how do you ensure these task force are empowered enough, but also successful in their efforts, right? How do you ensure that? Can one of you address that?
So it's Mike Williams in Toronto. I'll start, and hopefully others have more to add. There are a couple of elements to this that I think are very important. One is that there has to be somebody passionately committed to the partnership from one of the partners who is prepared to put in an inordinate amount of energy to making sure that everybody gets along and stays committed and is heard, and so that none of the partners feel like they're just window dressing on the masthead of a web page, but that they are truly involved. Secondly, the partnerships need to represent to a significant degree the community that they're working in and have a voice of that community. So when we do partnerships at the local level, we have to make sure that there's strong local representation. Similarly, if we're doing it in the business community, it is not just the 150-year-old Toronto Region Board of Trade, but it's also the most recent Tamil Business Association that was set up a couple of years ago that are at the table as equals. So if you get those two things right at the beginning, you have a much better chance of the partnership working.
So I would just add, we have a series, this is Bill in LA, we have a series of industry cluster councils that we put together in recent years to help our industries through the now seemingly much more manageable transitions they were going through as our entertainment industry was moving more towards the digital creation and distribution and exhibition of their content, as our aerospace industry was moving from a defense model towards a space commercialization model, as our healthcare industry was moving towards biomedicine and telemedicine, as examples. Those groups are now remaining connected with us and each other to talk about the much more substantial disruptions they're facing, because they're quite unique and different than the others. And so they have built up a level of trust and commitment to the evolution of their industries through the various disruptions they've been encountering in recent years from technology, globalization, climate change, and other forces. And we hope to be able to leverage their relationships on this. I would also say that, again, our local government leaders have been terrific about assigning roles for different industry leaders here in our region to play to help with not only shortages of medical supplies. We have folks in our garment industry who are ramping up to produce the masks and gowns we need. We have other folks engaged in addressing other shortages. We have an LA jobs portal where our major employers who are committed to hiring, the Amazons and Walmarts and Krogers, who need people for their teams to handle the increased demand that they are facing in our region, where as a result of the stay-at-home policies, people are making significant runs on local stores. We've set up an LA jobs portal through the mayor's office where these companies identify what their needs are so that if people do lose their jobs, they can find someone else who's hiring quite quickly in the region.
Bill, we got several questions on that. That portal, how successful has that been? We see some manufacturing, we got a question about one manufacturer is looking to hire. Has that portal proven to be successful for you? Is that a tool that they're using?
It's too soon for me to tell you that, because it was just set up in the last few days by the city of Los Angeles, and so I don't have the data yet on it. But it was really well received by all the public and private partners, because we were all getting individual questions saying, who's hiring? I just lost my job. And so this will become a place to centralize that information.
And who's the keeper of that, in case anybody wanted? Was that the WorkSource organization?
It's the city of Los Angeles at this point. I would just say, I think it's LA Jobs Portal is the name of it. I think if you go to LA Jobs Portal, and forgive me, I can't remember at this moment whether it's .gov, .org, but if you search LA Jobs Portal, I'm sure you'll find it.
Okay. So this would be a question maybe for Mike, the Mikes, or Jeff in particular. People have been also asking about how do we identify those clusters that we think are going to be able to help us in the recovery. So let's spend some time now that we think about recovery post-COVID-19. How do we focus and prioritize? Limited bandwidth, we want to do all we can to spur the economy up much quicker. How does a community go about determining what that next cluster is to help spur us get back on track? Any thoughts, Mike? Jeff?
So Mike Williams, I think you go in reverse order to the way the businesses shut down. I think that tells you which are the most needed. So in our case, it'll be food and beverage, some other manufacturing, and then the tech industry. And for us, the tech industry is struggling hard right away because venture capital money dried up very quickly as the stock market plunged. So, but they're also the most versatile and can restart very quickly. And they're probably people that can bounce back faster than some others.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Jeff?
Yeah, I would add to that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right, this is Mike Briella. I would redirect everybody to the last slide that I sent about reinvention. There is going to be, and I don't believe that it is a panacea by any means, but there will be at least temporarily a buy American, produce locally, reshoring, trying to promote, incentivize domestic manufacturing. It'll be interesting to see whether the government takes action like the IRS did years ago with the Section 199 domestic production incentive, and if they're going to incentivize that at the federal level. But states definitely are going to be incorporating into their business continuity plans, as well as corporations. They're going to be reanalyzing their supply chains, and for all of the wonderful cheap goods that we enjoy and can buy, underwear and paper towels, 99% of what we want from Asia for pennies on the dollar, there is going to be likely a subsidy as well as a demand and perhaps even a premium associated with businesses reinvesting in domestic operations. I'll conclude my thought with e-commerce and omni-channel retail is going to absolutely, it's been taking off, but it's going to grow exponentially. Virtual and enhanced reality, where people are looking at products virtually without going to a physical store and buying those, trying on clothes at home, and being able to order outfits that fit you perfectly without walking to a store. There is going to be in the e-commerce, omni-channel retail, fulfillment space a huge amount of investment and employment opportunities, delivery opportunities. Amazon was hiring tens of thousands of people and procuring tens of thousands of delivery trucks before COVID-19 hit. This is going to continue, and it's going to create new economic clusters and sub-industries, rippling all the way from the manufacturing part of the supply chain down to the last mile delivery, and communities need to be prepared and allocate resources to carpe diem.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Mike. I want to take the last 5 minutes. I think those on the front lines are small businesses. If there's everybody on the phone, I hope you've taken something back that's new or some additional thought. But if there's one thing the Economic Development Organization can do to help support a small business, proprietary or a larger small business, could I ask each of the panelists, I'm going to go through, and I think someone, if you're moving, put your phone on mute. But if you could think through, what would be the advice that we'd give our colleagues as to how can we support our small businesses that are really suffering in terms of lack of income? They're having to lay people off. I'm seeing the emails that are coming to me. So I'll start with you, Bill, in LA. What do you think is the one thing as EDO organization and leaders we can do to support our immediate needs of our small businesses now? Bill?
At this very moment, Eloisa, they're asking us to help lower their costs or bring in revenue in the form of debt capital or grants. They need cash. So our focus right now is on the liquidity of these businesses at this short-term moment. But I will tell you, if we don't all as a profession use this as a moment to recognize how unprepared our businesses were in our communities for this sort of disruption, and really challenge ourselves and the businesses that we serve to get better prepared in the future. The IEDC has for years been advising EDOs and the businesses they serve to get ready for major natural or man-made disasters. This is one of a scope and scale most of us never anticipated, but I would tell you that in LA, where we've been challenging businesses for years to be ready for a major earthquake or the wildfires we've been encountering, very few of our businesses really were ready for that. So at this moment, we have to help them survive. But as we move past this moment, we have to help businesses learn to become much more resilient organizations.
Thank you, Bill. Mike Williams?
Thanks, Eloisa. Thanks for doing a great job as moderator, by the way. Couple of points. I totally agree with Bill that liquidity, both personal liquidity and business liquidity, are the two main issues that everybody is trying to confront right now. And we in municipalities in Canada, or at least in Ontario, are prevented from helping directly provide grants or loans to small businesses. So our hands are very tied. So we're pushing hard on the province and the federal government to institute programs very quickly. Somebody earlier said interest-free loans. I think it might have been you, Eloisa, that interest-free loans with long payback periods and are one way that we're encouraging. On the preparedness, and Bill's very right about, I think that's the nature of small business. If you're a long-term thinker, I don't think you go into a small business. One of the things we're doing is we've had a program for a couple of years on what we call Digital Main Street, where we're helping small Main Street businesses become digitally competent to be on the web and to use the web as a sales and marketing and customer service tool. Stunning how many businesses don't even have an internet page or a web page, let alone be proficient on that. We're ramping that up right now. It won't be effective for enough people, but it's an opportunity, as somebody once said a long time ago, Mr. Churchill. Don't waste a crisis. So I think we're going to press on that. The last idea, and it's not our idea, and I'm not sure where it came from. It might have come from New York. Is the idea of restaurant bonds, in which we're looking at expanding to any attraction or cultural activity bond, where people buy a discounted, so $100 gift certificate in effect for $60 or $70, and the money goes into the business now, and then they can redeem it later when everything's settled down for a much higher value, and hopefully generate money for small businesses that way.
God, that's a great idea. I'll just repeat that just to make sure that people caught that. A restaurant bond, and I think you said, Mike, it came from New York, so I will look into that as well. I hadn't heard that one. Thank you, Mike. Jeff, how about you? What is your advice to our EDOs on the phone?
Stay calm, focus on recovery, recognize that you are the lifeline to the business community. The majority of resources that will come out will be focused in two sectors, government and social services. And use this as an opportunity. If you don't have a task force now, we changed ours from disaster recovery to business continuity about a year ago. And use this in thinking long-term about what your exit strategy is going to be to get your leaders around the table. And I'll close with a thought that I heard from Brent Warr from Gulfport, Mississippi after Hurricane Ike. He reminded me that the economic trends that were happening prior to Katrina accelerated after Katrina. Things that were going down went out of business. Things that were growing accelerated exponentially. And so thinking strategically about how we all come out of this and where those sectors are, where the disruptive technologies lie, could create opportunities to grow stronger communities long term.
Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate those words. And I would just add on as well, is that you have to ensure your teams are strong. If we're not healthy, your teams are not healthy, we cannot provide the services that people are expecting and needing of us. So always, team has to be front and center. And last, let me go to Mike Briella. Mike, what are your recommendations?
Yeah, I would say that, as Jeff had mentioned, I think it was Jeff, that, we're going to have to rely on data and information. And you don't have to be a big company or a big business to be able to use information effectively. Some businesses, as was mentioned earlier, don't have a website. They're not using social media. You got to get out of the dark ages here. If you don't have a web presence, you need to change that. If you don't have a Twitter account, you need to change that. You need to be able to get in touch with your customers and your colleagues and your constituents in ways that the rest of the world are doing right now. That's how you promote economic and social resiliency and stickiness. It is extremely important that you use the technology tools that are available to be able to get you through this tough time. Yes, the money, being able to access capital is extremely important, but letting people know that you're still open for business, having a web presence, finding creative ways to create products and services and deliver products and services in new and creative ways. That's how you're going to be able to weather this storm. And, you know, on the government front, let's not try to buy our way out of this once we start to see some daylight. Do not start giving away billion-dollar incentive packages. The corporate social responsibility mantra that was waved around after HQ2 has never been more important than it is today. We need to be talking to our employers and companies about being responsible citizens when they expand and locate and invest, and make sure that whatever public taxpayer money is allocated towards redevelopment is, for the most part, unless it's for small, medium businesses, trillion-dollar companies generally do not need $100 million abatements. They might need help with infrastructure or recruitment or training, et cetera. That's fine, but we need to make sure that as we rewrite this next generation of economic development incentive policy, that we are being super smart and playing a long game and not just trying to win back what was lost quickly through giving away taxpayer dollars. That I think slow and steady will win the race with sound economic development policy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I want to just take a point of privilege to say thank you to the panelists. Bill, your insights, Mike, your experience, Jeff, you know, what you're doing in Galveston, and Mike, Briella. I cannot thank each of you enough. I really hope that we've been able to provide some insight to our colleagues that are listening in. That has been our objective. I also want to thank the IEDC team. IEDC, with Jeff as leader, your vision to put this together and to do all you had to, I want to thank you specifically, and for your team that did an amazing job. So with that, I will send it off back to Lori, who will take it from here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Eloisa.
And on behalf of the International Economic Development Council and our presenters, thank you for joining us today. On the screen, you'll see IEDC's upcoming courses and webinars. IEDC will have weekly webinars to address the current economic and health crises, and hope you will join us. Be safe, stay healthy, and have a great rest of your day.